we'll all be screwed, and then the world will end, and then we will no longer record this podcast. Welcome to Crash, the tech podcast about everything else. Today that means trying to work out how addictive doomscrolling is, trying to work out how irritating booking travel is, and trying to work out how expensive Wi-Fi is in a travel lodge. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokell-Walker.
So I think the biggest thing, of course, to Crash listeners is just how viral we went over to Sir Stephen Houghton's proclamation that Barnsley is the single biggest user of Microsoft Copilot in the world. Well, now was and now has only been superseded by Shell, the multinational oil organization. I did chat to Microsoft after the episode to see if it's true. I heard nothing. When it went viral, I chatted to them again. I've still heard nothing. And a lot of the comments were like, this can't be true, this can't be true, this can't be true. Barnsley announced it in a big press release in early 2024 that they were engaging in this partnership. They have announced since it has been a good, deeply successful partnership. Barnsley still stand by that, and they're happy with what Sir Stephen Houghton said. And so we have no reason to disbelieve him. Like, I think, Chris, you were replying to a comment on one of the platforms saying that, why would he? It's such a weird lie to make up, which I think we stand by. But if Microsoft does get back to us and that changes, that has been an eye-opening into just how much people will engage with local politics, even if it is such a polarizing line as Copilot. So that the final bit before we get into the really actual proper meat of this, I'm using this podcast, a technology podcast, to talk something that's not about technology, but I've got a little bit of an exclusive that's mind-blowingly no one else has reported. People have hinted about it in the Times and Guardian, but no one's actually said it. So Owenna Griffiths, the editor of the Radio 4 Today programme, has announced her resignation, and so I've managed to get hold of her resignation email, which no one else has reported. So I think we can call it an exclusive. So she says, after more than 5 years as editor, I wanted to let you know that I've decided to step down and will be leaving today and the BBC at Easter, she says. She goes on to say that it's a brilliant programme to work on, but I know very well there are no easy shifts, and I appreciate every one of you who works overnight to get the programme out. And she closes by saying, just to be clear, much as I like working with Amol, my decision to leave is in no way related to his. So that's in relation to the presenter Amol Rajan, who announced his resignation in January. So it feels like everyone's leaving the BBC, Chris, and particularly when there's no jobs in media. That seems unusual. Am I just being I've spent 8 years at the BBC. Am I being too BBC centric, or is there actually something more in that?
No, I think that there is. I mean, I don't know what that would be because I'm not particularly well sourced on the BBC, but you would know more than anybody else. I mean, I know that my own habits of consumption have differed enormously in the last few years, to the extent that I don't really engage all that much with the BBC anymore. But I mean, what do you think is up here? Why are so many people jumping ship?
We'll do this very quickly because, my God, if you listen to the media podcast that I'm on once every couple of months, they only bring me on to talk about BBC crap. So if you know us, you've heard it all before. But it's the centralisation of the commissioning process means that editors don't get as much autonomy as they used to, which means they can't build their own programmes in the way that they formerly would do. There is potentially a budget shortage, even though BBC still gets way more money than everyone else. So there isn't that freedom to do it. And they are being pushed into doing a lot of numbers and analytics that the private sector were using 10 years ago and have moved on from since. And the mechanics by which you understand those metrics isn't developed in the same way as it might be elsewhere. And young talent as being so bottlenecked to come up. And so you're left with a lot of more experienced staff who don't have new ways of working built into them. And so all of the young emerging talent is really forced to leave to get anywhere, which, listen to the Media Club. You can listen if you talk about that for like 20 minutes, but this is not the vehicle for that.
But what's interesting is that they're taking a very different tech approach, right? Because of whatever it is, internal processes, yada, yada, yada. But then at the same time, you see the BBC being outmoded by other platforms, other social networks, other formats. You look at the sort of Ofcom coverage of, dwindling BBC viewing figures. You look at the radar numbers going down as well. And at the same time, you see YouTube and Netflix coming up. And I thought it was interesting. And the BBC license fee is the most boring thing in the world to talk about. And so I don't want to dwell too long on it. But there's been that interesting development over the last couple of months where they're considering all sorts of different things, including Netflix style stuff, even agreements with YouTube and Netflix as well, I think, in some ways.
With the Beeb, they're shifting onto like BBC YouTube, that big announcement of the week. They're just shifting into third-party platforms as everyone else is shifting away from them. They have always been a step behind. They always will be a step behind. That has to change. My partner laughs at me because I talk about how BBC innovated with CFAX, and that was like a really big development. And they innovated with what the web could do. And iPlayer was this huge big thing that Netflix doesn't exist without iPlayer. I don't think, or not in the same way. All of that is a huge important thing, but BBC has to innovate or else it dies. So on to our main story. So there's a slew of stories about whether or not social media is addictive and how authorities can regulate it, and if they even can. So we're going to talk about two main stories here. So firstly, the design of TikTok's app breaches EU guidelines and must be changed to avoid fines and further action, the European Commission has announced. So essentially, infinite scroll must be disabled, its recommendation must be changed, and it should implement screen time breaks, whatever that means. So it's the first time the Commission has outlined a ruling in this way under the Digital Services Act, which is a piece of legislation that the EU says is vital to protect users, and the White House really, really hate. So, Chris, you wrote about this story for Tech Policy Press. What on earth is going on?
Effectively, so this isn't necessarily the imminent death of the infinite scroll, although I think it does mean that there is a real danger of that in the longer term, because this will be appealed to start with. I mean, so the process here is that the European Commission has said that the infinite scroll is part of a suite of tools that make apps more addictive, and addictive design is not allowed under the Digital Services Act, the kind of passage of legislation that occurred last year to try and protect users from these sorts of dangerous designs. So yeah, that is the thing. Addictive design is seen as a problem, and the infinite scroll is one measure that is seen as problematic within that. To try and avoid that, to try and mitigate the impacts of that, social media platforms like TikTok have in recent years, because of the public outcry over this, implemented age-appropriate elements, so parental controls, things like that. Basically, what the EC is saying here, the European Union is saying, is that is not enough to mitigate the harm. And so actually they're saying you have to do something more significant, which, you know, I think probably they're going to say has to be a removal or a really wholesale change of this in order to actually allow these apps to continue existing. Otherwise, they get fined a huge amount, which is kind of 6% of their global turnover of their parent company. ByteDance had something like $180 billion turnover last year they were hoping for. We don't actually have reliable figures. So this is a massive moment. And it's not just a massive moment for TikTok. It's a massive moment for all social networks, because how many social networks do you have, Alex, that have an infinite scroll ability on them?
Well, I had a column in Newsweek called Infinite Scroll, so of course I'm pro Infinite Scroll because it's, you know, such a clever pun, of course. I don't know. I mean, of course, all of them do, but then Tumblr did 15 years ago. I mean, Blogger did 20 years ago. MySpace did. Did MySpace have Infinite Scroll? I feel like it did in the end.
I mean, it had 8 friends, didn't it? That was the important thing. You needed 8 friends and no more. Never mind the 150 network. It was 8 top friends.
8 top friends, and that was so much school admin and so much school politics. No, I think Infinite Scroll, and most news sites implemented Infinite Scroll because of the retention that was there. So I think specifically on Infinite Scroll, it is weird that TikTok is being singled out, and I don't. Maybe you do, and maybe this is a question. I don't know why on that TikTok is being singled out.
Because they have a younger user base. Because rightly or wrongly, and it is a little bit rightly, a little bit wrongly, because they are not as young as you might think these days. They aged up an awful lot during the pandemic when people were stuck at home, and particularly when they would go home for Christmas and would start to use TikTok, and then actually your parents or your grandparents became a little bit interested in it. But they are still, I think, a younger user base overall than most social networks. And so the kind of concern here is that idea of, we're in a post-Jonathan Haidt anxious generation moment where everybody is worried about the impacts on teen mental health of social media and tech more broadly. And this is seen as kind of the most teen-focused version of it. And so that's, I think, why they are being singled out to start with. TikTok is the one that has the generally younger user base here.
And this isn't a sort of US, China, geopolitical Cold War type thing. My assumption was that they had something to do with it, or am I just trying to to sort of shoehorn that into a thing that isn't about that at all?
Well, I think that there are certainly China hawks in European democracies and within the kind of legislative and also the executive branches of Europe. But I think it's much less of a kind of geopolitical aspect. I think it's probably that they are seen as the weaker option to attack. Maybe because they're not American in the sense that we would imagine. Of course, now they are in many ways because they are, at least in their USDS version, part owned by American companies and invested in by American investors. But if you're trying to pick a fight with a social network, the options are kind of few and far between. That is not going to annoy Donald Trump. So if you go for the one that you think of as kind of the least American, that's probably beneficial for you in terms of not triggering this massive trade war, because Donald Trump is obviously a hair trigger away from doing whatever he wants and causing chaos within geopolitics.
No, the US has got its claws right into TikTok. Did you see that conspiracy theory, which I've tried to show, and it is not by the journalese of saying it. I've not been able to independently verify. Means I tried it and it was garbage and it's a conspiracy theory. But there was people on TikTok saying that they'd been automatically auto-blocked Bad Bunny, so they went to his profile and they realised that they'd already blocked them without ever knowing who this person was. 2 people on TikTok have posted it. I've yet. It feels like stuff for clicks. So it's nonsense.
Either stuff for clicks, or it's just that this is a cock-up that people are putting into a conspiracy. So remember the issue that we had with the TikTok data center right after the transfer over for the US one, where people suddenly saw that they couldn't search for Epstein, they couldn't find various other things that they thought they would be able to. They were being shown MAGA movies effectively on TikTok. That obviously makes people concerned because it's such a massive change to the way the app works. But actually, it was just a data center that Oracle ran that went offline, and it happened right in the middle of that really massive move over, which is probably partly also why it happened. And that causes these massive conspiratorial elements to come to the fore.
So it seems we're talking about America anyway. It gives us a good excuse to move on to the second part of this story. So there's a landmark case in the California State Court about whether or not social media is addicting the brains of children. So this case has been in the news for a while, but it's finally arrived into court. And it's the first of many on its way, but it boils down to Google-owned YouTube and Meta-owned Instagram, and whether or not they're addicted to children. So both TikTok and Snapchat's owners settled before this case reached court. And a 20-year-old known by the initials KGM is at the centre of this. So she identified herself as Kaylee in the court yesterday. So that was on Tuesday, and we'll call her Kaylee from now on. And they are one of 3 plaintiffs who have been selected as effective test cases. And so if lawyers can prove these 3 people are addicted, that opens the door to maybe thousands of other cases and a more broad change. Meta lawyer Paul Smith said that there is disagreement within the scientific community over whether social media is addictive, with some researchers believing it doesn't exist or that addiction is not the most appropriate way to describe heavy social media use. YouTube is not social media at all, according to Google lawyer Lewis Lee, saying that the platform is like Netflix and the recommendation algorithm is just there to help people to decide what to watch, not to, begin quote, get in your brain and rewire it, end quote. And the lawyer for Kaylee said that social media apps were like a slot machine that fits into your pocket. And Kaylee has said that she feels trapped and could not get off Instagram. I mean, the case is ongoing. It's all going through this week. So what we might say now might be outdated within 3 hours. But the most recent testimony, Dr. Anna Lembeck, and if I've pronounced that name, I apologize, the psychiatrist and Stanford professor, she's been giving testimony and says that the design features of social media are addictive after she reviewed social media companies' own research and thousands of pages of internal documents. And the case is expected to run into March. So, Chris, there you go. Easy. We can solve this problem in about 5 seconds. Is social media addictive?
I thought you were going to ask me that, and I was really, really worried on the walk up that you were going to ask me this. I mean, look, so
you pitched the initial story, so this is all you.
I know. Well, this is the problem, right? So some research that social media companies have done almost to the word says that they are. They have some researchers within there who are expressing in those internal documents, which we are getting in court and which we've had previously through leaks to media over the course of several years, do worry about the impact and the addictive nature of their platforms. It's interesting that I used the word platforms, by the way, because that is one of the things that they are still riding their defense on, is that actually they are platforms. They are not responsible for the content that their users post, and therefore why on earth would they be responsible for the idea of being addictive in any way, shape or form? But at the same time, they are also right, these social media companies, in saying that the science is not settled. It's not settled within their own companies. There are people who are doing individual bits of research that say this could be problematic, but then we don't fully know. And I think what's interesting about this is that it's such a politically polarizing and socially polarizing discussion point, right? Because you feel passionately either way, and it's very difficult to untangle the emotional aspect of this from the reality of it. That's why Jonathan Haidt's book does so well, because he appeals to your emotions and you kind of overlook some of the gaps in the science out of there. Same thing here, I think, where actually, there are really valid cases and really personal, poignant issues that are being brought up, and also in the research by lots of others that are being presented there, but we're not fully certain. And so it almost doesn't matter what I think, it matters what the judge and the court thinks, because at that point, well, it doesn't matter what any of us think, right? It's because there will be people listening to this who will have different opinions wildly on this. There'll be some people who say this is an addiction machine. There'll be some people who go, well, no, I completely disagree with that. But what actually matters isn't necessarily whether we can arrive at a settled decision on that scientifically. It's the decision of a person in a court, or a group of people in a courtroom, that will either tank the future of social media, or will allow it to just kind of continue as it's been going on for the last 20 odd years, and whatever comes.
Is that how you see it? So if this idea that it is addictive, that to have to change that practice and to change that design, that would tank social platforms as they are now?
Well, I think it makes it much less interesting. And the thing that we have to bear in mind is, we have seen already that we're kind of growing a little bit tired of social media, many of us. There were those charts put out by the Financial Times. They'd collated a load of data that suggested that actually peak social media was something like 2022. I know that I find myself not turning to some key platforms nearly as much as I used to. And, part of that is maybe just aging up and going, well, actually, there are too many calls on my time. Running around trying to check into a travel lodge earlier than you meant to and things like this. That is important grown-up business that you have to do. But actually, I think also it's just that what I see there isn't as fulfilling anymore. I don't find it particularly interesting to spend my time on X scrolling through stuff. I don't really find any use from the Facebook slop that we get these days on the newsfeed. So, if it's going to be said and agreed that actually this is kind of addictive, then I think, social media companies are incredibly powerful, no doubt, but I don't think that their grip on us is as strong as it used to be. And so having a decision that effectively would require them to yank out the most addicting bits of their platforms leaves them with a weird empty husk that wasn't particularly interesting anyway, because we're already finding it not particularly interesting with all the tricks and gizmos that they've got to keep us on there. But you disagree with this?
I think I broadly agree with you. So I think there's that difference between the attention economy and the addiction economy. So all of the shareholders and all money and all business relies on keeping users on the platform as long as possible. And TikTok is the most effective at that. YouTube is the most effective at that. And to your point around no one spending any time on X or Facebook, we are not the age group definitely not the age group for Facebook, and no one is on X. And so I was arguing with a chatbot about whether or not X is meaningfully useful to stay on, and the chatbot was definitely absolutely is. People don't necessarily use it, but people still reference it as this port of news call, and I'm like, there's no evidence for that. Damn you! I need to prove this wrong. I've actually commissioned out some qualitative research at some big players to try and prove the AI wrong, which I think shows how damaged I am. But so the point. There is a point here around social media is no longer social media, so it's not you talking to friends. It's not many to many. It's one to many, and it's just a new age TV platform. So this is what YouTube is arguing in court, that actually it's more like Netflix than it is a social network. And you can argue that TikTok is more like Netflix than it is a social network, because you're not chatting with your friends. You're not kind of engaging in that social correspondence and that long conversation. You're watching a thing and commenting on it, and that's like social media of the 90s or the noughties. And there's that gap. So I follow people on social media, not that I know in real life, not that I want to know in real life, but people who create good content, people who engage in issues that I care about, and there's sort of that niche microbeat of storytelling or whatever that is that social media, probably in its newest iteration, yes. But is that social media as we'd understand it, or is that psychologically damaging? No, I'm just watching stuff about weird opinions of people, or it's that I don't think they're answer to is. So this is almost like a case of social media of old. And also, I've never been a 13-year-old person with access to social media because that's before my time. And so what that happens to young people, and you can get into a debate around either gating or, and we've had that conversation before. That's a different conversation. But for adults, I don't think it's damaging necessarily. But I think the research that the leaked papers that Meta has put out are quite clear that it's kind of addictive. So I think with that in mind, the algorithm can be used to make more vulnerable people addicted to a platform. I think that is relatively clear. It's just the case as to whether or not in court that means that the platforms themselves are addictive. Like infinite scroll doesn't mean that you're addicted, it just means you spend longer on it. And that's attention rather than addiction. Different. But I think what happens in between in that grey area of people that have a personality or a sort of psychology where they're more likely to get addicted to things, I don't know what happens there. And I don't think infinite scroll is a problem with it. I think the idea of polarizing content and falsehoods and the removal of Section 230 around what is true and what is false is probably better. And limiting access to direct messaging people you don't know or people that don't want to be messaged about harmful things is more important. But the overarching point of this case is children can't get off social media. Yes, we understand that. Is that the social media's fault, or is that falls into, is it parents' fault or is it social platforms' fault? That's so deep in the weeds and nobody knows the answer to that.
The big concern for me is that this is the start of a debate around the last era of technology. I mean, think about all the things that you just said about the addictive nature of social media, and then think about what we think about AI, having pointed out that you literally said not just a minute earlier before you started talking about the addictive nature of social media that you said you got into an argument with the chatbot and then commissioned some research to try and prove it wrong.
Look, I will win that argument. But so I think, but then it's like, if we're doing this case now, and the law moves much slower than social networks. So actually, when you look at Web3, look at the way that Discord is operating, look at the sort of the walled gardens of perhaps deeply damaging conversations are happening, and because there is less scrutiny, because it's less one to many, it's more many to many, and in small closed gardens. When does the regulation and the safeguards come in for the Web3 stuff? That can be a direct question to you, Chris, because I think that is where people are now. And like you said, people are spending less time on social networks, but they are having more and more DM conversations and more quasi-private or more special interest groups. How long does it take that regulation to arrive?
Well, they're already getting ahead of it. So Discord is one platform that you mentioned there. This week, they announced that they are going to be turning on by default teen protections to try and prevent people from accessing stuff that they're not meant to. So every single account on Discord from early March will be treated as if the person is underage until they prove Discord wrong and say something different. So they are saying, we will block you from adult channels. We will stop you from being able to look at content that is inappropriate for anybody over the age of, I think it's something like 16 or 18 or whatever it is, unless you give us a kind of live facial recognition image or you show us your ID to store this. And what's interesting is there's been a massive blowback to that, in part because Discord had issues with a data breach in 2025, which they said themselves was down to a third-party provider, not their fault, Gov. I contacted them for a story that I'm writing anyway. I haven't heard back, so we are kind of covered a little bit there journalistically. But interesting that even those Web3 sort of forward platforms are thinking, I need to try and head off what might be coming down the corner for me in terms of the risks there.
But then you're against, and I think we were both against, to verify your identifications to look at adult content.
Yeah.
Is your view different from that to this?
No, it's exactly the same. I think that this is awful. I think this is a bad idea, but I also recognize that this is what we're seeing now. And I think that's part of what the opposition to the Discord issue is people are going, hang on, like this is just invading every part of my life. It's what I was ranting about when we were discussing this because of the Online Safety Act coming into force, which is, yeah, you might think that it's just because you have to show ID in order to get onto a porn website, but actually, increasingly, it will be every single part of your digital lives. And lo and behold, that's what's happening. And it's affecting not just UK users now. Discord is rolling this out across all of its global users. So even if you are not in a jurisdiction that currently has some sort of child-friendly age verification rules in place, you still have to abide by basically the same sort of thing.
And now, due to the unique way that Chris's internet is glitching, we should probably take a break. We'll be back in 1 minute. Welcome back. This story only came about because Chris having to pay for Wi-Fi at a travel lodge. But Airbnb reports its earnings on Thursday evening, probably just by the time you're listening to this. Though, if you're one of the few that really rushes first thing on Thursday morning, we would love to hear from you, as we'd love to start a little Thursday morning thank you club, as the people who get in there first are always the sort of our biggest listeners, and we're always so grateful. So get in touch if you are one of those people. But otherwise, Airbnb's share price has dropped 10% since the start of the year. It's actually dropped nearly 50% over the last 5 years. But that's a little disingenuous because of the COVID bounce. But it's for a number of reasons, but in big centres like Barcelona, Amsterdam, and even London, regulations have made short-term letting a lot more complicated, and that means travel lodge bookings without Wi-Fi. Legislation both in the UK and across the globe is making Airbnbs harder to find, more expensive to rent, and means Chris has to pay for Wi-Fi. In the UK, there's a national register for all short-term lets being launched, local councils being able to impose planning restrictions and usage limits in high-pressure housing areas. So essentially, you'd need a similar document to build a conservatory as you would to list your house on Airbnb. It's not exact, but you know. Local caps are now becoming more widespread, with London having a 90-night rule per year. So Spain's just ordered the removal of nearly 90,000 so-called illegal Airbnb listings. It's fined them €64 million nationwide as part of a housing crackdown strategy thing. Barcelona's planning a full phase-out by 2028. Budapest is planning a ban, and the EU is signalling more regulations are on their way. In the US, countless cities have certain licensing or stay restrictions, and New York City only allows primary residences to be let. Entire apartments can't be rented without the host being present. Despite all this, 398 million nights were spent in short-term rental accommodation, booked by Airbnb, Booking, and everyone else. In the EU, according to the European Commission, that's 9% above the same data last year and 28% above 2023. And Airbnb's numbers are expected to show moderate growth. So, Chris, I'm sure you'll know this already, but it's known as a bull call spread. That's what I've been reading market readers talk about, and I could lie and say I fully understand that before doing this research, but it broadly means they're optimistic, but sort of small optimism to a point. But it feels like regulators are conspiring against Airbnb and other short-term rental companies. So, Chris, is my impression that regulators are conspiring against Airbnb fair, or is it just me building a story out of nothing in particular?
No, I mean, if you built that out of the fact that I don't have Wi-Fi in my travel lodge, then, which I paid £3.50, 3.5 Great British pounds.
£1 million.
For, then no, I do think that this is a story, and I think it's interesting because you see it through your lived experiences, right? I mean, I used to use Airbnb an awful lot. I have tailed off that because it got too expensive, in the same way that Uber, I suppose, started subsidizing their rides early on, and then, you know, they did the boiling frog thing where your prices start to go up a little bit, and you go, well, hang on, actually, I'm kind of paying for not as good service as I would, yet I'm paying taxi rates. So there is an element here, I think, of that happening also with Airbnb. But the reason why I think these local authorities are starting to step in is because you see that impact day in, day out. Why do we have, for instance, tourist taxes increasingly being levied? And, you know, we are seeing, I think in London, a sort of discussion around this being levied by Sadiq Khan. He wants to do that. We see this in lots of other cities around the UK as well. It's in part to try and recoup for the hotels a little bit of money that they previously had when there was a pre-Airbnb era. But now, service departments, I think, are a really big bit of business and destroying, in many ways, large parts of the hotel business. So to me, there's kind of like two aspects, right? There's the impact that it has on hospitality, which is bad. And then there's also the impact that it has on the ability to get housing, which is also bad. And I don't really know how you undo that in many ways beyond just, I think what they're trying to do is disincentivize it or make it so difficult for Airbnb or their type of sort of accommodation to actually exist, so that the prices become just unpalatable to the average person. I mean, When was the last time that you were in an Airbnb though, Alex? I haven't been truthfully in one for a long, long time now.
Maybe 12 months ago.
Yeah.
I think we always try and do Airbnb first, and then it's only afterwards that. But I had not stayed in a hotel for like 10 years, maybe, and then suddenly we're now staying in hotels. It's very strange. Oh no, that's a year ago, last March. There you go.
There you go. You remember now.
So the most important thing from your answer is that the boiling the frog thing is a myth and a fable, and it's never actually been true. Frogs are smarter than we give them credit for. So the idea that you can, if you put a frog in a coal pan, you heat it up, and it won't notice and it will die before it ever notices, is not true. Frogs need a better PR team.
There's the TikTok quote for you.
How are we going to start this episode? Now that we're becoming wiser to it, we all know that that's the way it's going to start. Oh fuck! And yeah, so on Airbnb, I think it's another example of people not being able to have nice things. So the principle of Airbnb, where you could let out your spare room, or you could go on holiday and you could let out your room, or you could have a second home, despite despite the issues with any second home in any circumstance. You could let that out and you can make extra income, and it allowed small businesses to pop up and utilize that. And what it has become, was it Wired that did that brilliant story about the London sort of mass high-rise thing that was all taken over by this one developer, and it had become this sort of homogenized, bulk bought, flat mush, and that was just a hotel by any other name, and it wasn't a very good hotel because a lot of the regulators are talking about the fact you don't have to have all of the building licenses and the fire licenses and all the health and safety that goes on with organizing a business in this space, but you do reap the benefit of still hiring 30-40 different rooms a night. And so I think that is obviously a problem, but then cowing to the big hospitality is a problem. But then the lack of housing, particularly the so-called high pressure areas of, well, it just means any big town. And should you be allowed to rent out that home when people are crying out and the list for social housing is so high? Again, that's not Airbnb's fault. That's not short-term, that's fault. So they're being blamed for systemic and generational choices around social housing, around house building, and we're not going to fix that. Maybe we can build more houses. So I think it is a symptom of a much wider problem around house building and access to social housing, and housing becoming a commodity rather than just a thing to live in. I don't think the solution is going back to hotels, because hotels back in the early noughties were overpriced, really poor service, and consumers, the second they got an opportunity to have an Airbnb, walked. Like that capitalism in a free market, which is a lot of what these people are advocating for, means that if an Airbnb is cheaper, better, or more suited to a person's experience or desires, they should be able to do it. And we're saying no. So again, to your point, I agree with you. Like, there is no simple answer, and it is a difficult, nuanced thing around it. But I think Airbnb is the hospitality industry is better for it than with it in it than without it.
I guess I found Airbnb just too expensive, and I found it ridiculous that the things that I used to like about hotels, I was paying hotel costs effectively to not have hotel features, like having to tidy up after myself. I mean, I don't leave rooms in a mess anyway. I haven't yet been kicked out of the London King's Cross Travel Lodge, even though I might rail against their Wi-Fi. But I kind of dislike the idea that either I had to pay a cleaning fee or do it myself, or even worse, increasingly, I had to pay a cleaning fee for an Airbnb and also tidy away my own stuff. Like that seemed to me a bit too much of work, really. Housework. I barely keep my own house clean enough, never mind other people's houses that I'm paying money to stay in for the privilege.
And is it that standard thing of, like you were saying, of Uber ran at a loss for a while, Airbnb were losing money on this, and now they've increased it to essentially you're at market. So like you were saying, you are just paying the same as a hotel. Or actually, is the regulation costing that extra money? Is it the fact that you're paying the tourist tax and you're paying all of these extra things? Or is Airbnb just entering the mature phase?
I think it's the Airbnb entering the mature phase, but then what's being added on is that there is now this extra stuff that is going to make it it's disincentivizing, right? This is the whole point. I think Airbnb realized, and others like it realized, they needed to make money at some point, so they were going to hike their prices, and they did. that obviously takes time to feed through to the market. And actually, governments had recognised that short-term rentals were an issue within their cities for a long time. And so they have kind of added pain on top of that to try and see if they can snuff it out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I guess the way that Airbnb and others try and survive maybe is by effectively, cutting their costs again, making it cheaper once more. But then you run into this kind of horrible, vicious cycle of you're not getting enough people through the door because it's too expensive, so you cut the cost. But then actually you end up having to hike the price again because if you don't, then you're going to go out of business pretty soon. So what was it, your mini bull or whatever it was called? I mean, maybe I'm like a mini bear. Maybe I'm a Paddington or a little teddy bear, something like that.
They were advocating for a cautious bull call spread. So it means that you need to spread your bet a little bit, but it should see slight growth. If you are closer to the markets than I am, my God, call me. I'm not going to profess it. I literally Googled what does this mean, and that's what it told me, and that's what I wrote down. So
I can think of another 2-word phrase that begins with bull to describe some of the language that financial people use.
That's one word now. Everything's shortening. I think I was looking for Airbnb for there's this thing outside near Gatwick Airport called like Oktoberfest, and it's essentially just a horror festival for like over the course of a night. And it sounds quite funny, and the Airbnb was twice as expensive as a sort of mediocre hotel. And if you're going to a sort of scare fest outside Gatwick, you're not particularly looking for a glamorous hotel stay. So it's more like what's the best value. And so I think that then means if Airbnb is the same price, what better offering is. And I think it'd be interesting to see the results, because if you think like actually Airbnb is still growing quicker than the overall market. So Airbnb is growing. So like the 398 million nights we sort of said earlier, but actually hotels are now starting to increase. So 1.3 billion nights in Q3 alone. So that's 1.7% up year on year. And this is all from European Commission data. So nearly all EU countries are seeing actually sort of traditional hotels or traditional accommodation growing again, which wasn't the case pre-COVID. And so that actually may be my assumption going into this, that actually the hospitality lobby it was big hotel chains really getting onto the back of the European governments, particularly, but global governments, about please stop Airbnb because they're taking our market. And I still think there is a lot of journalism to be done in that space, because I don't think we have a full picture of just how much lobbying goes on, because the US lobby is a little bit opaque. The EU is slightly less opaque, but it's still not fully transparent, and there isn't one lobby to aim at. So it's a lot of pushing different numbers together to try and work it out. And so if my assumption is that big hotel groups are campaigning to make sure that Airbnb is regulated, somebody needs to go and find proof of that and work through the journalism of the hard task of making that happen, because Airbnb isn't spending that much money on lobbying, except in New York City, which it's spent millions and millions of dollars on. Because I don't know that the governments will be as quick to regulate, except for the fact that housing is in such short supply. Say that 3 times quick.
It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one, because I guess the tourism is a big part of the income of a lot of places, but also I think the housing equation is what makes people actually move and actually do something, because you can have, as we're seeing with Keir Starmer, publicans, restaurant owners, whoever annoyed at you, but if you've got losing the public's perception on this sort of stuff, that's when it really starts to bite you in terms of the ballot box.
Yeah, but then we're even turning against tourists. Like the act against tourists in Barcelona, you look through the way that the US is treating its tourists and the tourism falling there. There's this anti-tourist sentiment that is growing, and maybe we'll come back to that in a future episode, because I've done zero reading on it. I don't understand that at all. Have you done any reading around that to make any sense of it?
I have not, unfortunately. I just know that I saw the videos of tourists being accosted by locals when they were just eating their food on the side of the road or whatever it is. It didn't look like a place I want to go to.
If you've watched more than 2 TikTok videos, then you can proclaim to be an expert. That's how the internet works nowadays.
Of course. Brilliant.
Anyway, because we have just admitted to knowing nothing about the issue, we should probably take a break. We'll be back in 1 second. Welcome back to part 3, the bit where we ask questions to which there is no answer, and a special edition today of How Well Does AI No, Chris Stokel Walker. So we, due to the unique way we've gone about this episode, which hopefully you haven't heard yet, but it's utter chaos, I have used AI to help prompt this question. And to be clear, if ever I'm using AI, I will be clear and transparent about it. So my prompt was, give me a tech question I can ask Chris Stokel Walker to which there is no answer, or at least no simple one. And here was the first question without any context about what this episode was about or any information about scripting or anything. If platforms stopped optimizing for engagement tomorrow, what would break first? Their business models, democratic discourse, or our sense of identity?
Oh, well, I mean, definitely not the second one, because democratic discourse is already broken from that. So maybe it would heal democratic discourse. But I mean, their business model would, right? I think that is the main one. There's that idea of knowing you better than you know yourself is what makes these businesses money. And we see this through the layering of adverts into this. It's not necessarily the time on platform. They don't care if you're actually consuming the content, which is probably why we're seeing the great enshittification of social media and just subsumed by slop. And actually, the bits that we were talking about earlier in terms of social media is not that social anymore. And that, I think, is a depressing thing to conclude, but also it's a factual one, because all that they care about is how much do they know you, and therefore what can they sell you in terms of adverts. And that's what makes them the money. So if they lose that element, then they lose the ability to make their money. I think that on that latter point of, some people maybe losing their sense of self, there are a lot of people who are performatively posting through their lives, and that is all strength to them. They can do that if they want. I am absolutely not one of those, despite what my pronouncement on LinkedIn might sometimes seem. I wouldn't suggest that that's going to be a big issue in terms of like the losing your sense of self. I do think that the first thing that would break would be their business model. Would you lose your sense of self though, Alex? Would you think that would be the thing that would be the key element for you?
I would love to know the extent to which people rely on the internet for their opinions about things, or their sort of sense of reading about things, and rely on the algorithms to serve them things that will add to their collective understanding of whatever that is. So I used to read fashion magazines religiously, and now a lot of trend forecasters, some good, some horrific. The horrific ones that get filtered out give me a lot of the sort of fashion forward trend forecasting for forthcoming seasons. And so actually, if I lost that would mean I just have to go out and buy a fashion magazine again. So that's not my sense of identity, but my sense of understanding of the way that fashion trends are shifting in one way or the other. I rely on the algorithms for that. And I think if I was much younger, what is cool, what isn't cool, what should I think, what words are allowed, what words aren't allowed, is this thing cool, or if I say this in school, am I going to get shamed? And again, am I just projecting because I am now so far out of the schooling system? I have no idea what happens in the education system, no idea at all. And my little nephew is nowhere near school age yet. We're just way out of it. So I think it could have a profound impact on identity for younger people who are still figuring stuff out. But I also think the analog fight back is coming. The sort of revive, the push away from phones, particularly within schools, is happening. And also, I just think the business model would collapse way quicker than it before this sort of deep societal, nuanced conversation around the importance of digital self to real self and uncoupling those two things. I don't think that's at all. I mean, second they lose $10 billion, $100 billion, their entire market cap will vanish, and then suddenly that won't be a problem we have to think about. Then we actually have to go out and talk to each other in real life, which is, I think we're going to spend an episode really talking about that, because there's some interesting stuff coming out that I'm reading at the moment, so we're going to delve into that a little bit deeper at some point.
You wouldn't lose your sense of self because you are Sigma, Alex. See, I am still down with the slang and know what I need to know.
What is Sigma?
Well, Merriam-Webster says that Sigma is an internet slang term.
No, absolutely not. You're not giving a best man speech. Like every journalist has written
unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. Shall we move on to my question?
No. I don't know what Sigma is.
Sigma just means that you're really cool. Like you've got it all together. You're in clutch.
I know what clutch comes. There's a spot. No, the quoting a dictionary thing. I did an English essay, and I tried to pull in one of my early journalism articles, and then it was like, no, it's
We have a lot
Same
of
as the Minority Report rule.
Yeah, we have a lot of student journalists who listened after you basically lambasted them and insulted them several weeks ago. If there's one bit of kind of usable,
I insult them?
Well, it sounded like you did from what you were describing. One bit of usable advice is the big thing between being like a student journalist and being a journalist is getting rid of those sorts of things in your writing an awful lot. So don't repeat Alex's issue early in his career when he decided to go. The dictionary definition of a multi-crisis or a polycrisis is...
You pulled it out. You pulled it out in a podcast today.
You're never too old to learn new tricks. Anyway, do you want the AI question that I've just asked to produce for you in the same way that you did?
Did you not even do a prep? Did not even do the prep of asking your AI question before we started recording?
No, Alex, I did it while you were explaining yours. Or do you want a one that we can talk about that is human?
Well, let's try both. Okay. And if they're both, let's try the human one first.
You're determined to bankrupt my mobile data is what I'm learning here because of the failure of the travel off Wi-Fi.
I am determined to make you get a phone contract. Mine is £16 a month unlimited data. You probably spent £16 just recording this podcast because of the travel.
I spent £25 the last time that we recorded this on extra data. Anyway, look, okay. So the AI
phone
one,
contract.
The AI one is this. It also describes you perfectly correctly. It says Alex Hudson is a UK-based tech journalist, podcaster, co-host of Crashed, an AI expert who covers technology's intersections with politics, policy, and society. Snick that off your LinkedIn. This is perplexity that I got to do it. So your question is, in a post-AGI world shaped by current AI policy trajectories like the AI Safety Institute's initiatives and data sovereignty efforts, what precise mechanisms will prevent geopolitical AI arms races from eroding democratic oversight of superintelligent systems by 2035?
I'll give you at least a soft one. That relies on Asimov's laws that have already been superseded. So, do no harm, essentially. It's more complicated, but Asimov's laws are still forming and there's still those green papers that are in the wild about the do's and don'ts of AI regulation and AI pace. Having that encoded into global, any sort of United Nations or any meaningful global ratified treaty around the ethical use of AI Act and having that as a global agreement is the single biggest, most important thing. And the erosion of democratic discourse has already happened. We're already in the sort of end of days. And so the democratic norms have already been eroded. With AGI, if there is that ethical policy in place, then it means that people will have to write and code it in a transparent manner. If they're not, then it'll just be reliant on the bros who code it, and then that will cause a much bigger problem, and there won't be the oversight. Then we'll all be screwed, and then the world will end, and then we will no longer record this podcast. I feel like that's an entire episode could be that question. So maybe we'll look. I think the erosion of democracy because of AI is a fascinating question, but you're right. There is no answer to it. What was your more human one?
My more human one was on a similar path, which is, as we've been recording this episode on Wednesday night, Casey Newton of Platformer has reported that OpenAI has disbanded its mission alignment team. So that is effectively the one that tries to ensure AGI, artificial general intelligence, so it is actually weirdly linked to the AI-generated one, benefits all of humanity. So OpenAI's disbanded that team that is designed to try and ensure AGI benefits all of humanity. And at the same time, this week we saw a researcher at Anthropic, Mrinank Sharma, who leads their safeguards research team, resigning from the company to basically go and do poetry. And he was in charge of basically ensuring that Anthropic's AI models stop us from falling into sycophancy traps, stop us from using AI to create bioterroristic sort of weapons and things like that. So I guess my question, to which there is no answer, is what do they know that we don't right now?
So I think there is one part of an answer to this question, and I think particularly with Anthropic's hiring policy, they allow you enough share capital, enough ownership of that within those contracts, that if you are not if you believe in the beautiful holistic thing around AI and you can hold it and you want to make the world a better place, you've already earned more money than you need and you can leave. And you can go and write poetry. You already have your life income sorted. So unless your goal is to then fight fire with fire, and the Anthropic versus OpenAI wars just jumped up because of the Super Bowl ads around Anthropic taking the piss out of OpenAI. Those were the winners of the Super Bowl ads. There were incredible ads about OpenAI offering advertising. Really, really well done. And so you can see that there will be one at most, we've talked about this before, one, maybe two, maybe three big winners. And to the people who aren't up for that capitalist fight are leaving and looking behind. But we know that Altman is looking into shareholder value more than he is the ethics around it. We know that already. So that's why he's trying to cut costs. And with Anthropic, I'm less familiar with the sort of the owners and what they really believe as far as the ethics of it. But it's a difficult thing to get right. And the ethics part of it is a cost. It is not a revenue generating model. And so you can see, at least in this phase, that growth is more important than the mechanics of good policy, particularly. Or it feels that way, at least. I'm sure when we ask them for comment, they will say something entirely different and say it's just about realigning. Or what? Do you have any in on this? Do you know why he wants? Is his poetry good?
His poetry is not good, but that's by the by. I mean, barely any poetry is good, but that's fine. I mean, I say this no. I say this as someone who wrote poetry as a teenager and who loves poetry, but like, there's an awful lot of schlocky stuff out there. Everybody thinks that they can be a poet, probably me included, and actually very few people can do it well. So, you know,
who's the best known schlocky poet? Who's the best known?
William McGonagall. Are we going to do a little history and English literature lesson here? Okay, so William McGonagall is a famous Scottish poet, infamous Scottish poet, 20th century. Well, he snuck into the 20th century. Sorry, he's mostly a 19th century poet. He's basically kind of widely regarded as the worst poet ever. And so, have you never heard of William McGonagall?
He wrote all of my poetry, as most of my English literature degree was a sort of mid-century US. So my dissertation was on O'Hara, that sort of era of New York School of Poets, and all of that sort of vibe. So I am, hipster by name, hipster by nature. I've yet to escape it.
I'm a William McGonagall stan. It must have been an awful sight to witness in the dusky moonlight while the storm fiend did laugh and angry did bray along the railway bridge of the Silvery Tay. Oh, ill-fated bridge of the Silvery Tay. I must now conclude my lay by telling the world fearlessly, without the least dismay, that your central girders would not have given way, at least many sensible men do say, had they been supported on each side with buttresses, at least many sensible men confesses. For the stronger we our houses do build, the less chance we have of being killed.
See, and you thought the frog PR thing was going to start the episode. Now it's just a poetry recital. I feel like we've ended on such a low.
We've ended is what we've done. We've ended. Crashes and everything as popular as wrong production.
A 19th century podcast recital on a technology podcast.
Don't say that we don't give you stuff that's of interest to you. We broaden your horizons, dear listeners.
With
William McGonagall, look him up.
Poetry. Crashes and everything popular is wrong production. Follow us on all your favourite podcast platforms. The title music is from Nuffer and is from This Century. Check them out on all the streamers. We're hosted by Acast, assisted by Riverside Studios, and we are published every Thursday morning. Get in touch if you want to say how great we are, how terrible it is, or you just want to chat about something we've covered. You can find me at Alex Huds, ALEXHUDS, on TikTok, Instagram, X, Threads, wherever you want. Follow Chris on X at Stokel for the moment. He will leave eventually. All his links are there to everywhere else. If you want to support the podcast, go to crash.substack.com or search for Crashed Podcast wherever you want, and we'll be back next week.